What are some of the biggest questions we have for 2023 for some of your favorite ACC programs, right? They happen to be playing each other this season, a part of the 3-5-5 model. We'll answer all of those here on today's show.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to today's edition of Locked On ACC. I'm your host, Candace Cooper, joined by Kenton Gibbs of Locked On Wolfpack. Each and every day, you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you download, subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, and leave comments and talk to us because we certainly love to talk back. We've got a fun field day today. We're talking about the biggest questions of 2023 for some of your favorite programs. We're going off the 3-5-5 model, so those that play each other, of course, can answer those questions a little bit easier because they're going up against some very familiar foes. We'll be talking about Boston College, Miami, Syracuse, and Pitt, and we'll go through each section. That way, if your team isn't here, but you still want to know what potentially it could be like for them this season as you're preparing for an ACC championship, you should listen to every single episode. Kenton, how are you feeling?
I feel great as always. You know what I mean? Coming off of ACC Media Day, seeing the questions that these guys answered at a high level, I think that I have a pretty good grasp on who has questions and what areas those questions are surrounding.
100%. So let's not waste any time. Let's talk about Boston College. We'll kick things off against three opponents, Miami, Syracuse, and Pitt. But for Boston College, a lot of conversation around Emma Moorhead. He was highly touted at ACC Media Day. Many thought he was very, talented in his speaking in terms of what his knowledge of the game is and how he'll perform this season, knowing what he's up against and what he's trying to overcome in terms of some past quarterbacks there for the Eagles. Now for Boston College, there's a slew of questions, of course, you want answered going into this year. But I think, of course, for me, the number one is, will Jeff Hafley turn this program around enough to save his job?
Yeah, I think that that's a very good question. It's a very overarching question as well, right? That encompasses almost everything in terms of, well, actually, yeah, it encompasses everything. He's the head man. He makes the decisions. He is the engine that makes the car go. So, I mean, it's asking the question of will he turn it around, get this thing rolling it's a great question to ask, and it's a very legitimate question. I don't think anybody's surprised by that. I think the biggest question for Boston College is how good is that offensive line going to be, specifically Christian Mahogany, right? Like that's the question. Coming off an ACL tear, they say they used to say it took 18 to 24 months to be back to your full self. He's about, I want to say at this point, 14 months removed. I want to say he tore last June. So he's about 14 months removed at this point. But the question would be, how is he and the rest of this offensive line going to perform that has been thrown together in a very short order, right? Normally we're used to seeing the best offensive lines. They play together, they grow together. Either they were all recruited together or a majority of them were recruited together. You got one or two transfers in there, but this is an offensive line that's going to lean heavily on some transfers, as well as some guys who didn't play a lot last year, who were out all last year with, like I referenced, in Christian Mahogany.
I think another question for me, of course, you talk about who you have, but sometimes it's about who you don't. How do you replace a Zay Flowers? How do you replace a Josh DeBerry, especially if you look at two sides of the ball? Really good offensive guy there, and the wide receiver, Zay Flowers, a really good cornerback in Josh DeBerry. How do you replace two stars who were essential parts of your program now left when you already are a team that was doing, wasn't doing the greatest, trying to find nice words here,
right?
Struggling mightily. How do you replace guys like that?
Yeah, and not only that, let's take it a step further, right? This is being said that, Zay Flowers is potentially the best receiver on the Ravens right now. And I'm not a Ravens expert, but that's seems to be coming out of camp a lot, a team that's featuring OBJ, you know what I mean? So that's an interesting thing there. But even beyond that, like you said, this team is actually returning a ton of production. 80%, I want to say, of their total production stat-wise from last year is coming back. So there's plenty to be excited about in terms of, well, the guys who are going to replace these folks, we've already seen them. And so, I guess the second biggest question for me in terms of replacing and whatnot would be, do they have the depth through the middle football and baseball are similar, and you want to be strong up the middle at every point. And do they have the fortitude on the inside in terms of their defensive tackles in particular to carry all the way through an ACC season? We saw last year with Boston College, injuries happen, and football is a violent game. And so if you're one injury to a defensive tackle away from having a horrible defense, that's tough. That's a tough predicament to be in.
Yeah, and I think just leaning on not only the receivers, but also that run game that Boston College has been known for, and it hasn't exactly been touted these past couple of years. Can that improve mightily going into this season, and what will that running back room truly look like coming out of camp? So those are the questions for Boston College that we have. Ken, do you have any final ones before we move on to our good friends at Miami? And we already know how that's been to go.
Let's move on to Miami. Let's do it.
Wonderful. So the Miami Hurricanes, of course, face Boston College this season. We feel like it's just going to be one of those good ones where we, in theory, think Miami will dominate, but you just never know which kind of Miami program we're getting. And I think that's my biggest question is, what am I getting from Miami this year? Am I getting the Miami that is going to be high flying with a Tyler Van Dyke that is mature, with a receiving core that's a little bit better and a defense that's doing the damn thing? Or am I going to get a Miami that has all the studs, but they can't quite put it together on the field?
Yeah, that's a definite question for Miami. I mean, the biggest question is, how are all these pieces going to gel? You have some really good pieces. You have some players that have played a good amount of football together, but they haven't always looked in sync. All of these really, really good players who are really, really good as individuals, we've seen moments where as a unit, they've looked lost, lifeless, listless out there. And so you're asking yourself, in year 2 under Mario, is this the year where they take a giant leap forward in terms of, the locker room fully being bought in and all the guys doing things in the way that they need to be done in order to get themselves a potential ACC championship appearance?
I think it's, along those lines of what's the emotional maturity of this team this season. Can they, be high on themselves when they're in close games like Texas A&M and not take themselves away when they're in games like Western Michigan? Can they remain a certain sense of composure they have? What is the coaching, going to look like this season? I think that's another question for me. We have all these studs come in, and there was high, hopes because of who Mario brought in. But now that you have them there, they haven't seen quite the production you want. Is it still something that we are, applauding, or maybe things that maybe everyone feels like they should be the head honcho and it's not quite going the right way?
Absolutely. And on top of what we've already talked about with how does this team gel, we also got to look at the fact that this is about 40% of the roster was turned over. So you talk about, how these guys are going to work together and whatnot. You're not looking at an easy situation. You're not looking at a situation where, like I talked about with offensive lines, it also matters for the team to some extent. How have y'all played together? If you look at, perfect example, Joe Burrow and the boys down in the Bayou, his first year was rough. Why? Because he just got there during the summer. They didn't have time to grow and all that stuff together. But after having a full offseason, things were different. That the question is that what we're going to see out of this team? Guys who have played together, been together, and now are looking good.
1,000%. All right, let's pay some bills here real quick as we're going through the season. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every play is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure to be a part of everything you need that fits just right this first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you shop on eBay Motors, you can definitely get what you need. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available for U.S. customers. Eligible items and exclusions do apply. We're talking through our 3-5-5 model of teams. This first quarter we've got here, Boston College, Miami, Syracuse, and Pitt. It's time for Syracuse to get on the mic. We know that Garrett Schrader probably should have taken a page out of Kenny Pickett's book in terms of making sure your O-line is fed throughout the season with steak dinners. I don't know, because I feel as if this O-line is certainly matured in a lot of ways, but losing a big production, Matthew Bergeron, it's going to be, can they still remain composed so he doesn't have to use his legs and nearly as much as he did last season before he got hurt.
We talked about this with Boston College, but the offensive line, the big boys are the heart and soul of everything. People talk about how Pat Garwell's last season wasn't all that. It's because the offensive line wasn't good. And so with Syracuse, you're going to have some of those similar questions in terms of how good is the offensive line. It's a very valid question. It's a very, very valid question. My question for this team would be, can you stay healthy this year, especially at the most crucial junctures? Dino Babers specifically spoke about how injuries held that team back last year and how they had a bunch of guys who were bona fide starters get taken out at some point in time. And so, that's a tough task. That's a tall order to see. And, he talked about the fact that depth leaves through the transfer portal. Let's just be honest. Syracuse doesn't have a ton of talent. They don't have a two deep that's filled with guys that are going to be playing on Sundays pretty soon. That two deep is filled with future real estate agents, investment bankers, things along those lines. So with that being said, it's a very serious question along the lines of, how do you keep those starters healthy? Because if they go down, you could be looking at a repeat of last year, if not worse, in losing Sean Tucker, which would probably be the second question. And how do you replace a guy like Sean Tucker?
You don't. You don't replace the work ethic. You don't replace the guy who's playing injured. You don't replace a Sean Tucker.
Okay, well,
you work through not having a Sean Tucker, but you don't replace a Sean Tucker, in my opinion. Based on the way we've heard Dino describe Sean, I feel like you don't replace that.
I think you don't replace it one for one. Sure. But I think you can replace it by multiple guys stepping up and performing at a high level. You know what I mean? Like Sean Tucker had that home run ability to where, somebody loses contain. Next thing you know, strike up the band playing Syracuse's fight song. But with that being said, I mean, that's not the only purpose of a running back. And also you can survive without that home run threat in the backfield. It just makes things a little bit easier on you. It makes those boxes a little heavier, which makes the passing lanes a little bigger down the field. So, in terms of replacing them one for one, I agree. You're not going to do that. I don't think they have a back on this roster that I'm like, oh, yeah, that's the guy. He's going to do everything Sean did and better. But with that being said, running back by committee is a thing for a reason.
Agreed. I think one of the biggest things for Syracuse is going to be game management. Can you handle the clock? Is that going to be a hiccup for you? You have a veteran at quarterback. Does he know when to get the ball off? Are you going to have to burn timeouts? I think that's just something. Listen, let's cut it plain. These are fundamentals. These are things you must execute. Don't waste things that you're going to need at the very end, especially with a team like this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you look at teams that shock the world, right? The teams which if Syracuse wants to be a serious contender in this conference, they're going to have to shock the world. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at a team like that and you're saying, how do those teams generally get it done? They get it done by not beating themselves. What do I mean by that? They're always positive in the turnover margin, and they're always positive in the pre-snap penalty area or the area of, not having to take frivolous timeouts and whatnot because they struggle to get a play in or because the defenders are out of place or somebody didn't get off the field or whatever the case may be. They control the controllables at an extremely high level. And so clock management is definitely a controllable. But I will say this, with the new rules for the clock as well, where I believe the clock is continuously running except for inside the last 2 minutes of each half, I wonder how that'll play out into this clock management aspect.
1,000%. Let's talk about the team here that I feel as if could potentially be everybody in their pod. It's a team that, of course, has been ACC champions in recent years, but now has a new quarterback at the helm who's familiar with that Pennsylvania game, and that is Pitt. I think this is the only team in the group that can be everybody, right? Like if surefire, I don't really have hesitation. They're going to be Boston College, Miami, and Syracuse. Crazy things have happened. Of course, I've seen the great Miami-Pitt matchups. I'm excited to see, it all come to pass. But for me, the confidence in Pitt just comes from now that you have a good quarterback, you shouldn't have any excuses as to why you can't be a top program, correct?
In theory, yes. But also, you talked about how do you replace a Sean Tucker. Sean Tucker wasn't the leading rusher in the ACC last year.
That's fair.
You know who was? Young Izzy Abanikanda.
Free our dog. Our dog got free.
He's free. I was just about to say he's free now. He's free now? But he was the leading rusher in the ACC last year, and so that's a guy more than anybody else that you ask how do you replace, because the offense, he was their first, their last, their everything on that offense.
Because he had to be.
Of
because
course.
Our buddy won't do what he need to do. Where our buddy at?
He's at Rice now, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, he's at Rice now. He's played at like his fifth or sixth college in so many years. But anyway, yeah. So this is a situation where I'm looking at this offense and saying, do y'all have the weapons around Phil to make this thing work out? Because we can talk all the talk we want about how special Kenny Pickett was and all that he did, but I believe that he had a receiver go on and win the Biletnikoff. So, it's not.
So does Phil have the weapons, but is Phil really the answer?
And I think that both of those are questions. Because we would love to say, hey, Phil was just playing behind the rough offensive line last year, and now that he's playing behind the better offensive line, everything will be better, and there will be rainbows and sunshine and happiness and all that good stuff. And not so sure about that. And I will say this, in the similar vein of Brennan Armstrong being reunited with Robert and I, Phil Dracovic is being reunited with an offensive coordinator who was at Boston College while he was there. So you're looking at a situation where he is going into an offense that is somewhat familiar.
Mm-hmm.
This is an uber talented young man.
Mm-hmm.
The offensive line is better, but still that question of the weapons around him lingers big. You know what I mean? Like that just, they've got a great tight end over there, but you still need somebody to stretch the field. And also, you got to run the ball. And who's going to be doing that?
That's fair. Now, when it comes to defense, are we at a point where we say that Pitt is a reloadable team?
Oh, let me tell you something. You could put 8 sentient Roombas on the field with 3 Division I ball players. And if Narduzzi is coaching them up, they'll find a way to be in the top quarter of defenses in the nation. They'll find a way. So I really don't have to worry about Pitt defensively. If you worry about Pitt defensively, there are better things to be worried about.
That's
much
fair.
Better things to be worried about.
So of all the teams listed here in this 3-5-5 model, well, they'll be playing each other for the next couple years here. Who is the one that stands out most to you, and who is the one that's going to struggle mightily?
I think Boston College is going to need a new coach coming up here soon. So I think if they don't get that next coaching hire right, they're going to be perpetual bottom dwellers in the ACC for some time to come. And in terms of teams that are set up to dominate, as much as I want to say Miami, because they really are just the team gelling and getting it right away, Pitt's got the success. They've shown it. They've shown what they can do. Also, I don't want Peninsula P yelling at me now, but seriously, Pitt has shown. They've proven and they put it together in a way that I have more faith in Narduzzi and company than I do in Miami.
Fair enough. There you have it, guys. I personally feel like, Boston College is in need of a new coach, but new energy, new vibe. I think that Syracuse also is a team that may be one coach away from being a pretty good program. Yeah. But when it comes to dominance, I really feel like Pitt has it right now. However, Miami could be one coach away. I don't know. It's hard to come after. It's easy to come after Manny. It might be a little more challenging to come after Mario. But it could be like, a Louisville situation where you were just one coach away because you had all the pieces. You just needed one person to put it together nicely. So remains to be seen, but that's why we play the games, and it's going to be a nice, good little crop. And we got model number 2 coming here for you. We're going to make sure that you are locked and loaded and ready to go. We will be talking about Clemson, Florida State, Georgia Tech, and NC State on our next episode. So make sure you check that out. Again, while you're sitting here saying these might not be your teams, these could be potential opponents you're facing this ACC championship season. So you want to know what you're looking at. There could be some upsets. It could just be a straight shooter. So find out all of that on the episodes throughout this week. We'll make sure you're good and ready to go for July. As can't believe it, the camp is really here. For Candace Cooper and Kenton Gibbs, we'll see you next time.